Okay, so Dr. Nickelston, welcome to the podcast. It's good to speak again.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on this show. I'm really excited to be here. We're going to talk about lymph, which is one of my favorite things on the planet.
Yeah, I'm always looking forward to these conversations because I just think, as we said off air quickly, the lymphatic system is such an integral part of our overall health, but something that gets so little attention, it seems, even in the research ultimately. So we talk a lot about things like the microbiome and a whole lot of other things, but I mean, what I learned from you and your courses that you've put together, etc., on the lymphatic system is kind of jaw dropping ultimately. But before we dive into the topic, for people that might not be familiar with you or what you do and your background, are you happy just to start with sort of your story, I guess, and what's brought you here today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I've been in healthcare probably for about 26 years now, which is kind of crazy to say. I started off originally in chiropractic, which, pardon me, I still do, and that's what's hanging on my wall is my professional diploma, so that I can take care of people. But I do way more than that right now. So it's honestly really hard when people ask me what do you do? I don't really have an answer because I can't say chiropractor because people have this mental picture of what that is. And that's really not a lot of what I do because I study many different types of disciplines from all over the world to, help people not suffer as much, including myself, because what brought me to where I am right now was my own pain and suffering, which usually is what changes the course of your life, that forces you to look at yourself or your health or the world in a different way. And then I just wanted to begin to share that with other people, right? So, one, I got into chiropractic because I suffered a musculoskeletal injury, which is the lower back, and that was one system of the body that I originally got into. But I suffered later on in life through an autoimmune disease where like all of my systems got affected, and I wasn't equipped to help myself with my prior training, just going after the musculoskeletal part of the systems in the body. And then that was what forced me to look at all of the other systems and how they work together. And then, of course, ultimately focusing in on the lymphatics as a big one. But I mean, that's pretty much what brought me here today and how the name Stop Chasing Pain was formulated, because its whole premise is that we certainly want to treat pain, but you don't want to fall into just going after where pain is, where somebody points to next. That we need to think better than that with if we want to get to our end goal of feeling better, and getting the health that we all deserve and can obtain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, since you and I spoke initially on the lymphatic system, referring people to go and check out your course and things like this, and just doing a little bit of almost just basic lymphatic work. And my experience, I guess, is that the lymphatic system is one of those barriers for people to healing through other modalities, as it were. So it feels like a bit of a missing piece of the puzzle for many when they're trying all the usual things and not getting the progress that you would expect. So with that in mind, do you want to just kind of, I guess, introduce the lymphatic system? Because again, it's one of those systems that many people don't realize they even have.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, medicine sometimes forgets about it too, which I'm trying to change every single day. And I would like to preface it to say that I was once like that myself. Like I didn't really pay attention to the lymphatic system all because I didn't really think I had to, quite honestly. And basically, let me tell you what it is first, and why I think it's neglected. I do think it's the most important system in the body that you never hear about, and the one that's the most neglected for people telling you, first of all, what it is and why it's important. But then once they tell you that, they're left hanging with, well, what can I do about that, right? So the lymphatic system is part of your immune system. It's a big part of your immune system, but it's also a huge part, which many people forget, of your cardiovascular system, which is the health of your heart and your veins and your arteries. And it always ultimately relates back to gut health, because the gut is a huge player in your immune system. And I think 70 to 80% of your immune system with strength resides in the gut, which is massive, right? And then there's no accident that Mother Nature put most of your lymph in your gut. She's pretty smart like that, right? And so its primary job is to kill things, like stuff that you don't want inside of your body that can make you sick. The lymphatic system's job is to kill it, diminish it, and help you get rid of it, to get it out. So it kills things like toxins of all different types, especially from the outside world, man-made as well, but also ones that get made inside of your body. Because when your own cells die, which they're supposed to do every day, because you're supposed to make new ones that work, they can become toxic. That's called metabolic cellular waste. And if you don't get that out, the waste stays inside and you start to slowly decay. And then you have bacteria that come on in. You have viruses as well. Not, so I have to be careful with the word virus these days, because people freak out at that. But, there's trillions of those guys around. But bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungus, cancer cells as well. It kills cancer cells every day, so you don't actually physically end up getting a diagnosis of cancer. So it's a big part of that, and it cleanses the system. And all of your cells live in this fluid-filled, nutrient-rich environment, and that lymphatic system is supposed to keep that fluid nice and clean. And just like a fish tank or a swimming pool that has a purification filter system, so you want to swim in it, and so fish can live in it. And it's the same thing with their cells of your body. It is, in my opinion, the most critical system for survival, but also living at our optimal capacity. Because if the system immediately stopped working, you'd be dead in about 24 hours. That's how powerful it is. But it doesn't just stop working, but what it does is it slowly begins to stop working as well as it should. And then that's when you start to get these slow onset things of just feeling yucky and terrible and tired and fatigued. And you get all these different diagnosis label names that develop over the course of a lifetime. And you wonder why you all of a sudden one day are a mess. And then, yesterday you didn't think you were that much of a mess. It's that slow onset. And for me, when I was really, really sick and got the autoimmune disease, and I was really sick and deteriorating from the traditional medical approach, which, they weren't trying to kill me, but they were doing a pretty good job of it with how they were thinking. Not once, not a single moment did anyone ever mention lymphatic system to me at all. And I'll be honest with you, I'm in healthcare. I didn't even think about it.
Right.
So what does that tell you? Like, what are the chances that an average person who is sick is going to hear anything about it? You probably won't. And that's why it's my calling, honestly, right now. It's my mission in life to change that every moment that I can.
So you mentioned sort of, I guess, some of the potential symptoms or way you may feel if there are issues with the lymphatic system. Are there any sort of more common or typical symptoms, or is it kind of a bit messy if we take that approach to it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I kind of joke when I teach about the lymphatic system is that people say, how do you know you have a problem with one? And I'm like, well, you're alive. That's how you know you got a problem with one, because It's just been getting a beating your whole life, and you've probably never intentionally taken care of it. We'll get into ways that you can do that later. But yeah, you can honestly have any symptom that you want to pick out of a book related to the lymphatic system, because symptoms are just your body telling you something's up, right? And then we slap a label on the symptom, but the symptom is usually your own body's way of trying to fight something in the first place. The symptoms in and of themselves don't necessarily mean that it's the disease that's causing the symptom. It's the body trying to recover and fight that disease that you have, and then the symptom is just a part of that. But probably the most common that you'll see is a lot of tiredness, fatigue, lethargy, brain fog, swelling in the body, swelling around joints, inability to lose weight, a lot of tightness or stiffness, especially when you wake up in the morning and you feel like you are the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, or you feel like it's quote unquote your arthritis. It's just that your fluids are not really moving that well, and you're basically like stagnant like that. Also a very common one is the inability to pinpoint pain in a single place. Like it migrates all over. Okay, hey, today my knee hurts, and you treated my knee, but now it's over in my shoulder, and it migrates all over the place, and you're like, the whole thing hurts, man. What do you want me to tell you? And that usually means that there's this what they call systemic full body underlying inflammation in the body, and it will usually manifest its quote unquote symptoms of discomfort or pain in an area that is where you hold most of your vulnerability. And that's prior injuries or areas that have been under a lot of stress and duress through the most of your life. So those are probably some of the biggest ones that you'll get. And then I think 99.9% of people listening to this right now will say, I got a couple of those.
Yeah.
Right? And here's the thing, that won't show up on like a test. They won't show up on blood work. And that's the person who says, I've gotten all this blood work and everything comes out within normal ranges, but I still don't feel well. Or they can't, I've had thousands of tests and they don't see anything. That's because with the system, it's knowing where to look at it, how to assess it, the right questions to ask, and something that's a lost art in medicine today, which is the ability to step back and be very observant about what you're seeing on a person's body, what they're telling you, and more importantly, about what you feel with your hands. And those will tell you if you're dealing with that type of systemic issue. And that's a lost art, in my opinion, in medicine today.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I just want to go back actually to, you mentioned a potential symptom being essentially an exacerbation of symptoms in the morning on waking. Yeah. And that's definitely quite a common theme that we see. So is there anything that you can just expand on from that perspective?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you sleep at night, you're supposed to go into a dormant, like deep sleep recovery mode, because your sleep is where you heal and you recover and you regenerate. But few people sleep well. They usually can't fall asleep, or if they do sleep, they're tossed and turning, or if they wake up, they feel more tired than when they went to sleep. And a lot of that's because they're stuck in this, what they call sympathetic dominant, like fight, flight, freeze, survival mode. The hormones of the body just can't rebalance themselves. So your body is always in this don't die mode every moment. And it's exhausting, but it's like it's exhausting quicksand that you can't get out of, right? And I think a lot of people are listening to this know that. And then that sympathetic dominance from physical stress and emotional stress that go together increases tension in the body. And when you increase tension and tightness in the body, then it decreases the ability for fluids to move well in the body because the tissues are so tight. And lymph fluid and even blood are mostly water, a huge amount of water. And then water inside your body flows like water anywhere else in the world. You just got to think about if it's open, it can flow well. If it's obstructed, it can't. I mean, it's the same thing. And tissue tightness obstructs fluid flow. And people just can't relax. And so fluid doesn't move. And when it doesn't move, it's what we call it stagnates. It stays in one place. And in your body, that is huge because you have a long period of inactivity at night too, right? So here's the thing. When two things move lymph fluid primarily: human movement. So the more you move of yourself, more often, more ways, more environments, that can move fluid. The other one is breathing, particularly breathing through your nose, which helps move the diaphragm muscle that's lower in your abdomen. That changes pressure in the body, which moves fluid. So when you're sleeping at night, you don't move, right? So you stop moving. And then most people really struggle to breathe properly at night. They easily breathe through their mouth or not through their nose. So then you have that shut down as well. And so fluid stagnates even more. And then they're finding now with the research that they've looked at with the brain itself, that the brain has its own toxins as well. It has actually lymphatics in the brain that they didn't originally think existed, but have always been there. And when you sleep at night, if you have decrease in tension in the body and you have adequate breathing through the diaphragm and your hormone levels can begin to calm down from stress, you physically will shrink the brain a little bit, and then you power wash the toxins from your brain and around your body while you sleep. And sleeping is basically a detoxification time. That's healing time. So during the day, you break yourself down all the time because you move and you got stress. Then at night, you're supposed to just relax and then begin to recover. But if that pumping mechanism doesn't work well, if the breathing doesn't work well, if the lymph is stagnant and it's trying to move, but it can't move, then when you wake up, you feel worse because you're just moving things into stuff that's already blocked. And here's the thing, you always have cells in your body dying every day by the billions. And you always have toxins coming on in, and it's just like a bucket of water that you're filling up all the time, and eventually it just overflows. You can't put any more in the bucket, and it just adds and adds and adds, and then you feel worse and worse and worse from that state. So that's one of the reasons why when you start to do lymphatic work, you can begin to move these toxins out of the body, and then people notice the sleep begins to improve. Because it's really interesting. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's like, I don't really care. You got a problem either way, right? Like, is it the lymph is stuck and then you couldn't sleep, or is it you couldn't sleep because the lymph is stuck? The answer is yes. It's both, right? It's both. So many people say, yeah, I'm trying to sleep, but no matter what I do, I can't sleep. And then they might have to end up taking medication to sleep, which can ultimately even make you more toxic because that's going to slam your liver a lot. And then once you look at the lymph, you'll see that a majority of the lymphatic fluid comes from the liver itself. But if you've got a liver that's overloaded and stagnant and can't detoxify, well, then you're hitting that as well with the medications that you may need, of course. And then I tell people, say, have you ever tried to do anything with your lymphatics to help you sleep? And I can pretty much tell you 100% of the time, I've never gotten a yes to that answer. Because they're like, lymph what? That's what they'll say, lymph what? And then boom, that's when I come on in, and that's when I go, and that's when I teach them and tell them all the stuff that we're going over now. So I know that was a long answer, but there's a lot of different players into why somebody feels that tightness or stiffness in the morning. And it's not, listen, it's not a part of getting older. That's BS. So don't say I'm more tight and stiff because I'm older. No, it's not supposed to happen when you get older either. It's just you've had many more years of your lymphatic system being a hot mess. That's why
Right.
it hurts when you stand up and you want to move.
Yeah. And I can really reiterate that really, because it must have been when I was 23, 24, and I have a very strong memory of, for a good few months, waking up, walking to the toilet, but genuinely having to hobble there. My ankles were just really sore, really inflamed. My shoulders and neck were the same. I felt like, I imagine, someone who hasn't looked after themselves for 90 years feels when they're 90. And obviously, as you would expect, those symptoms have completely and utterly disappeared. So it kind of shows you that this isn't an age thing. This is very much sort of a health thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look around, you have more people that are pediatric and children that have autoimmune and chronic
Right.
disease than ever before. So it's not an age-related issue anymore. It's how do the systems of your body work together or not work together issue. And so I don't believe that it's age related at all. I think that's just the easy way out.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you were talking about from sort of a detoxification perspective, because the thing that was coming up for me there is sort of the Eastern medicine philosophy of kind of the kidneys and the liver. I think between like 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., the kidneys and the liver are that's their sort of time within our circadian rhythm.
Yeah, well, I follow Eastern medicine a lot, of all different types, and I just love their perspective. And then when you study Eastern and Western medicine, you realize they're saying the same thing. They're just using different language when they say it, a different story behind what they're saying. That's why you need to mix both worlds. Yeah, but it's very interesting if you step back and you look at the design of the body. First of all, you need to stop breaking it into isolated parts. It's okay if you do that to study it, but if you want to help somebody get well, you can't come at it from that way, because when you put all the parts together, the whole thing changes. Nothing functions the same when it works with other things. That's basic laws of nature and even engineering. So I thought about it. The most of your organs, are designed to detoxify you, to eliminate things so you don't stay toxic. Like, why do you have kidneys? So you can pee. And why do you pee? Well, yeah, you put liquid in, but you make waste. You got to get that out. And why do you have an intestine? Oh yeah, so you can go poo, right? You got to get the nutrients go in, and the cells use the nutrients, right? And then the cells need to go poop and pee. And then when they do, that means you do, because that waste has to get out, and it gets out through you, one, peeing and pooing. Another way is sweating. So you sweat because, it's body temperature stuff, but you release a lot of toxins through sweat. That's why saunas work great, and why infrared saunas are good for lymphatics. But also breathing. Every time you exhale, you breathe out a lot of toxins. So all of these systems primarily are designed to take bad stuff out of you. And if one system begins to become overloaded, then the other systems will begin to take over, right? But what you'll find is that all of the systems are usually just so overloaded that they can't keep up. And the lymphatics are, to me, the most important system, because all of the other systems are beholden to, all those other organs that I mentioned are beholden to how well the lymphatics initially work, because the lymphatics are a big part of it actually delivering the toxins to those organs so they can get out. You know what I mean? That's like the messenger that has to deliver the mail to you. in order for you to read the mail. And it's the same thing with the lymphatic system. And it's quite fascinating when you think about why you have all of these organs. And when I look at the body, I always ask myself, why are we so sick? Why can't we we're supposed to get sick. I mean, that's what happens. That's how you get a very strong immune system, is you get sick and then it fights stuff and then it remembers what it fought. So when it fights it again, it's better, right? And then the sicker you get in the long run, the stronger you ultimately get, because you're supposed to get better. But I was always fascinated of why we don't get better, or why stuff keeps coming back so often. And humans like to complicate everything because it makes us feel important. And the human being the body is complex, but it's not complicated. Two different things. So I learned something from a very dear friend and mentor named Dr. Jerry Tennant, and I had him on my podcast. And something he said like stuck with me. He's like chronic disease occurs when you lose the ability to make new cells that work. Chronic disease occurs when you lose the ability to make new cells that work. And I thought that was a stroke of genius, because if you could make new cells that work, you wouldn't stay sick, right? Then that begs the question, what do you need to make new cells that work? That's the next logical thing, right? And so, first of all, if you got to make new cells, that means you got a lot of dead ones that you need to get rid of, right? That's detoxification. So it's a simple premise. In order for cells to work, they need nutrients, because they need a grocery list of stuff to work. And the primary things that you need are oxygen. That's a big one, because if you don't have oxygen, you're dead kind of fast, right? And then you need nutrients. Where do you get your nutrients from? Well, by what you stick in your mouth, right? Your food, your energy, which happens to go where? To your gut. So I need nutrients, and then the nutrients actually have to physically be able to get to the cell. And then once they get to the cell and the cell uses it, you have to get rid of the waste. And otherwise you get toxicity. And so if that system works good, if I get nutrients in, they can get to the cell, and I can get waste out, you should be a pretty damn healthy, resilient human. I mean, that's just the way you're designed. But here's where we run into a problem. Most of the time, we're not getting enough nutrients in. One, because we eat like crap. And two, and we don't breathe well, or we're breathing toxicity. But let's say you do get that stuff into the body. Just because it goes into the body doesn't mean it's actually able to reach the cell itself. So it's got to reach the cell. And then you learn that the lymphatics are the one that determines whether it reaches the cell or not, because it keeps the environment that the cells live in clean or dirty. But so if the lymph doesn't work well, you already don't get the stuff to the cell. And then the cells are already living in too much waste or too much toxicity. So they can't get the nutrients in because there's too much toxicity. So it's a very simple approach for me. It's a fundamental one. It doesn't mean that it's going to fix everything, but it lays the groundwork of what the body needs in order to even attempt to fix itself. Did you catch what I just said? Like, this system needs to be in place for the body to have any chance whatsoever to fix itself. Is the groundwork there or not? Yes or no? And so what we need to do is we need to remove the toxins that are there first, through helping the body detoxify itself, because that's what it's trying to do anyway. So you remove the toxins that are there, as well as try to reduce the toxins that are still coming in all the time, right? And then you add the nutrients, right? So where we get things backwards is that we're always adding nutrients in, but you're not taking care of the first part, which get rid of the toxins first. Because if you add nutrients into a system that's already toxic, you make yourself more toxic. Did you follow that?
Okay.
So that's why when they talk about lymphatic work,
a key phrase that I learned in osteopathic medicine, which really, it didn't resonate with me until I really started to understand physiology of that statement. You need new cells that work. And they said this, 3 words. Yeah, I had to make sure I got it counted. Drainage precedes supply. Drainage precedes supply, which means that you have to drain the toxins, you have to drain the metabolic waste, drain the stagnation of the fluid. Then you supply. Then comes in the nutrient part. Okay? That's a very critical, crucial order standpoint. So if you're trying to change your nutrition, for instance, like you know that you need to improve your diet. If you have an autoimmune disease, you probably have a leaky gut or whatever. We'll get into that in a moment. But you want to begin to clear your lymphatics, you know, at the same time, if not before, you begin to improve your nutrition. Or more importantly, what I usually have people do first is start to remove the amount of toxicity they're putting into their body first, right? And then that's just by not, that is a phrase that I say, it's not so much what you start doing with nutrition, but what you stop doing first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Amazing. And I think, you know,
that's pretty cool. I mean, once I heard that, think about that for a moment. It's so beautiful, but yet it makes sense, but it's simplistic, but that's how the body thinks too. Very, very simple. We just complicate the hell out of it.
Right. And then you mentioned sort of the term leaky gut just then. And one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on was really, I guess, the relationship between gut health and the lymphatic system, because obviously you mentioned at the very beginning, there's a 70-80-ish% of our immune system is in the gut. Yeah. But we've also got this gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GULT, which has a huge role to play. And I guess, you know, many people will consider it certainly one of the most important sites within the body to maintain health. So what connections are there? If we use the term maybe IBS, or people who are struggling with symptoms around bloating, constipation or diarrhea, etc. Obviously, people very quickly stumbled across the term leaky gut, and it's probably, in my experience, the most frequently self-diagnosed sort of condition, because there's just so much out there on the topic. So, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said right there. You know, I mean, so leaky gut is basically just like it sounds. I mean, stuff is supposed to leak through your gut. I mean, but you don't want a lot of stuff leaking through it. Stuff is not supposed to be there, right? Because that's what absorption is. You eat nutrients and then things go through the gut wall. That's supposed to do that way. But through stress and life, or anxiety and habits and behaviors and genetics and whatever, you blast big giant holes or spaces in your gut, and then stuff that is not supposed to go in there goes in there, and then your immune system sees that as an outside invader that's not good, and it begins to attack it. With what? Well, your immune system, right? And the first part of your immune system that sits right there to greet the stuff that leaks through it is your lymphatics. So that GULT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So when you start to look at the gut lining, you see through every single part of that gut there, you have a lymphatic that runs right up with it, right? And medicine really doesn't like to use the term leaky gut. They call it malabsorption syndrome. You know, I mean, same thing, right? That you hear. And I think irritable bowel syndrome is just like an early indicator of progression into a leaky gut, possibility of having some autoimmune dysfunction later in life. Most people who have some type of autoimmune disease, or especially a neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, you'll usually find some type of digestive gut related issue that preceded it many years prior. like constipation or diarrhea or bloating or gassiness or acid reflux. And those are just, that's the body sending you signals that, dude, but my immune system's going a little nuts here, right? And so the majority of your lymph is in the gut because your immune system thrives there. And it goes and attacks, and then when the lymphatics go out of control crazy, they can make you puffy, bloated, swollen, things like that begin to occur. And then you can start to have a lot of these like allergic type reactions to different things because of the immune system being hypersensitive to a lot of different things. Food sensitivities, food allergies. Yesterday I could eat peanuts, now today I can't, or break out in hives. What the hell happened, right? So it's that kind of thing that progresses over time. And so the lymphatics will begin to get overwhelmed in the gut, and then that just so happens to be where you have the largest, what they call lymph node in the body, resides in the abdomen, about 2 to 3 inches up from your navel, and it's called the cisterna chyli. And basically a lymph node is a gathering point where stuff comes on in, and then once it hits the node, that's a big place where your immune system sends all of these different type of immune cells to say, okay, we got them trapped here, guys, let's just kill them as much as we can, then we'll send them on to the next node, and the next node will kill a little bit more, and we can gang up on these suckers, right? Then that largest lymph node sits right there, and that gets the most backed up in people, because it just gets overloaded, and then it just so happens to be the dumping point for the lymphatics that come from the liver. And so when that backs up there, then you hit that, just think about the water running down a mountain that's trying to get to the lake. I put a dam in front of it, the water can't go through anymore. And then that's what happens to the lymph. And it just stays in that region. And then you notice all the stuff around the abdomen. And then all the other lymphatics that are attaching to that can become backed up. And then you start to get symptoms like in your knee or your shoulder or your hip or your neck or whatever. And so that's a very like fundamental basic of the important role that the lymphatics. So it's very interesting when I look at anatomy books, and I've studied muscles and nerves and bones and fascia, and if I'm looking at a slice of skin or I'm looking at any kind of organ in the body, they'll show you in a cutout, you'll see all the nerves, you'll see the veins, you'll see the arteries or the capillaries, and I'm like, okay, who's drawing in the lymph here? Like I don't see lymph anywhere. It just disappeared. And my goal is for people to know, that's the most important part in the whole picture, right? And it's supposed to be, I mean, they usually make it look green. That's the color in the books. It's not really green. It's usually clear or milky white. But it's supposed to be green to represent lymph. And I just want people to reframe their thought process of not forgetting all of that stuff, but then throw in the green and then see how now that changes the concept of how all of these work together. Because it'll make a huge difference in understanding how all the things I just listed function.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So I guess we've discussed what it is. We've discussed some of the, I guess, typical signs and symptoms, while appreciating that that's a very, very long list. And you've sort of started to touch on some of the things that we can do to support lymphatic health. But is it possible just to expand on some of these things? If people are starting to suspect that maybe they've got some lymphatic issues, which they naturally will by now, what are some kind of go-to tools that people might be able to consider?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be small little action steps that can make a huge difference. So I mentioned before that we know that two things move lymphatics primarily. And one is movement. So it start to move more of yourself now than you normally do. Even just the very state of more steps in a day can move lymph. Walking is one of the best ways to move lymphatics, especially from the lower body up, from the calves and the ankles and the lower body up to the heart. And most people don't walk a lot these days, right? And then sometimes that's hard to do when you're not feeling well, right? But and then there's some other things that you can begin to do with that. One is move more of yourself, more often, more ways, more environments, just more than you do now. Begin to focus on breathing a little bit better, which means concentrating on breathing from your diaphragm, which is awareness of, am I breathing more from my belly region or my neck and chest? And most people are like, I don't know, I can't tell. And I just say, breathe more through your nose in and out than your mouth, and you're on a good start. Mm-hmm. Because breathing in and out through your nose puts more pressure into your body and moves your diaphragm a little bit more efficiently, so you'll move the lymph a little bit better like that. And then this is where people usually tell me something. They say, Doc, I breathe every day through my diaphragm and I move a lot, but I'm still got a problem. And I'm like, then I ask them a question. So what do you think that means? That means that you're too congested now. You're too stagnated, that doing those alone are not enough anymore. And that's where you need to do maybe sometimes a little bit more of an aggressive movement or manual massage, lymphatic releases of key areas in the body. One is the act of jumping up and down, like on the balls of your feet, like you're on a trampoline, because trampolining or jumping on the balls of your feet moves this body up and down, and fluids move, right? And it's a form of vibration, and it can unstuck areas that are stuck just because you're jumping up and down. And most humans don't jump up and down, right? And you should. And the other one is just you can do some dry brushing that you've seen sometimes where people brush their skin, and because most of the lymph is where? In the skin as well, right? And then I usually show people how to massage around the big joints of your body. So I'll be happy to show the 6 places that I recommend in a moment when I'm going through my list, if you want me to.
Amazing.
I'll show you those. But it's very interesting because you know that movement moves lymph, and Mother Nature is pretty smart. I told you that already. She puts a lot of these lymph node clusters, which are remember the nodes are stuff that kills things. She put clusters of them. You've got over 700 of them in your body, but she forms a lot into the big joints of your body that are supposed to move the most: your shoulders, your hips, your knees, your trunk, and your neck. Because the more you move those things, right, the more that you move lymph. That's what walking is, right? So I'll show you the 6 places on that one that you can do. Hydration is big. Most people don't drink enough water, but I usually will find people that are dehydrated or have poor lymphatics. They are very low on mineral content as well, because they've been under so much stress for so long that they don't have adequate mineral balance. So they don't absorb regular water well. So I have them drink water that has trace minerals in it or electrolytes in it, and it will be much more easy for your body to absorb that content. Because some of the times the reason that you have constipation or you have stagnant lymph is that you're just dehydrated. Right? So you add some of the trace minerals or the electrolytes into your water, and then that can help. And watching your food intake. And I tell people, don't eat crap and eat good food. I don't need to give you a list because you already know what it is. Like, you just eat more fruits, vegetables, that have the phytonutrients in it, but you have a lot of water liquid content in fruits as well. So when you when you drink water, you can just put a slice of fruit in it or a vegetable in it, and that also helps you absorb the water, because the phytonutrients and the chemicals in the water help structure the water, so you absorb it much more efficiently. So you do that. So those are pretty big deals of fundamental, easy things that you do. And the 6 places that I have people massage the area is to reduce where you have a lot of this excess tension because you don't move a lot. And you release them in the exact order that I'm going to tell you to, and it'll help drain the lymph because it's just based on pressure. And I tell people, just think of a lot of water on the top of a mountain needs to flow to the bottom of the mountain. And then that's how we're going to do it this way. So what you do is you just take your hands and you can massage above the collarbone on both sides, right side and left side. So you take your fingers and you rub above the collarbone on both sides. And then I want you to put your fingers and rub a little bit below the collarbone on both sides. The point above and below the collarbone that's the big sticking point for most lymph. And if that's backed up, lymph won't work very well at all. So you do above the collarbone, below the collarbone with your fingertips for 5 to 10 seconds. It doesn't take a lot. Press in hard enough that you feel like you're getting a massage, but you're not hurting yourself. Then you go to the very top of your neck, right behind where your jaw sits, and you feel this big bone that's right where your ear is, and you just massage right at the top on both sides. That's number 2. Number 3 is right in the shoulder joint where your shoulder attaches to your chest muscle called your pec. So if I move my arm, that's the place where it moves. I do the left side, I do the right side. Then I want you to do the same thing from the belly button to the bottom of your sternum. So right around your abdomen a little bit. Then you go to the crease of your groin. So when you sit in a chair and you have that big crease, you massage right there. They get stuck. And then the other place is behind your knee, because when you sit, you flex your knee and then you choke fluid behind the knee. So then massage behind the knee, and you have to do it in that order. If you do it any other way, you can make yourself worse because you're not opening up these liquid channels the way that fluid wants to flow. And if you just do those places and then you jump up and down, you'll have even better results, right? It's just that simple. So for the people that get really tight or stiff at night, like we said before with the lymph, you can try that before you go to sleep and see how you feel. And then you can try it the next day when you wake up and see how you feel. One of the 2 ways you'll like better than the other, and you choose which one you like, the way it makes you feel best first, and it can make a big difference for you.
Amazing. And just to, I guess, expand on this, I'm not sure if I ever sent you my client's email, Perry, but I've had a few clients go through your online course, and I'm going to help you plug it here, the Lymphatic Mojo course. And I had a client, just to give you a little bit of context, he had mold toxicity, he had an old parasitic infection, he had toxicity from organophosphates as well. He did your course, and it was on the 2nd day of him doing it where he had incredible vivid nightmares that night. He woke up absolutely sweating. His sheets were just completely soaked through. And he had, for I think 24, 48 hours, some real sort of emotional releases as well. But he does, and it sounds horrible, but the positive spin on this is for him, it was one of the most important parts of his 8-year healing journey. So he's a huge advocate of lymphatic work and the Lymphatic Mojo course. And I use him as like my golden star of someone who's done this and who's reaped the rewards.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear. Thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, it can be all of that for people. It can be very emotional when you begin to work those regions. And then when you start to unleash the the obstruction or stagnation in the body and it begins to move, then you're going to start to release toxins that have been stuck for a while. And, it's natural to feel kind of yucky for a little bit when that first happens, but that's actually a good thing in a way. And I've had it to where people say that they're actually blown away, honestly, because it seems so simple that all I got to do is rub these 6 places. How can that make such a big difference in anything? Because it doesn't seem logical. And I'm like, well, it's actually really logical once you understand physiology and exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it the way that you're doing it. But they usually say, if this was so simple and so great, why the hell am I just hearing about this now? Right? And then I say, I'm asking myself that question every single day because you should have been told this up to that point. And it doesn't have to be complicated to be effective either. And it can be really, really simple. But that's human nature. We tend to think that if it's not really complicated or intensive, that it's not as valuable. And I say it's completely the other way around, where the basics and the fundamentals, because that's how physiology works, is the more powerful thing too. Like, okay, well, it's pretty simple that you need oxygen, but if you don't get it, you're dead in a couple of minutes. So that's simple. That's not complicated. That's pretty big. So it's the same thing with all of these fundamental principles.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that story. That's really good. Really good.
Yeah, it's an incredible journey, but I 100% agree with what you're saying there, because you just have to think that the creator, whoever that is, wouldn't have given us a lymphatic system that we weren't able to support through natural means. You talk about walking being a really effective way of supporting the lymphatic system. Like, we need to go back to the way we're designed to live ultimately.
Isn't that crazy how it usually comes down to that, right? And just these fundamental and basics that we that we know we're supposed to do, but we either just don't do them because they're too simple, or what I find actually happens a lot is that, one, people don't do them. But it's a very interesting journey I've had through learning is that even when all of those things are beneficial, that are simple, you got to be careful you don't do too much at one time, because the body becomes very sensitive to stressors, even good stress, to itself, and it can overreact. That's what an autoimmune disease is, or allergies are just an overreaction to something. So you have to tiptoe in and go slow. So when I teach the lymphatics, there's different ways where you go in easier and then you work up to more intensive or longer durations or more places on the body. Because if you do too much too fast, it doesn't get you better faster. And it's the same thing with nutrition or exercise or walking. And plus, human nature is that if I give you 10 things to do, probably you won't do 10 of them. But if you do 10 of them, you only do it for 2 days because you get tired of doing them. So I'd rather say, here's a list of 10 things. Which one will you start with first? Which one do you want to do? Okay, that's the one we start with. And then that's where we go from. And then you build up from there. Does that make sense? And then whenever I work with the body and I'm doing an assessment, I assess all the systems of the body all the time, but I assess the lymphatics first. The lymphatics always come first, and I need to see just how involved they are. That comes from my assessment, that comes from my history, and then I'll determine what I need to do. That'll be using my first treatment as well. And the beautiful thing about my system is when I teach people how to assess the lymph nodes, the assessment is your first treatment. Because just by the nature of you pressing on these areas where you have the lymph nodes, I gave you a big list of them, but there's a lot more, is that when you press on them in the order that I'm telling you, you just flushed your lymphatics without even knowing it. And then that's why people say, first of all, I've never had anybody in my entire life assess that system or push on those places like you did in one session. And then they say, I can't believe how much of a difference that made me feel the following day just from that. And I'm like, that's just the power of physiology right there. That's all that is.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And a question that I'm itching to ask is, have you come across any information from a herbal perspective in ways of supporting lymph? Are there any herbs that you know of that can get involved here?
It can be. I don't do too much with supplementation because I've found this is that no two people will react to an herb the same way. So because that, you got to remember that the autoimmune system is an immune system reaction, right? And then one person's immune system is having a reaction, but it's not the same as another person's immune system. And some herbs can do well with one person, but not necessarily another one.
Right.
So I don't get too much into that, honestly. But when I do, it's on an individual basis.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's a little bit deeper rabbit hole to go into, because you can have a lymphatic system problem, but when somebody's been sick a long time, it's like, okay, well, how did the lymphatic system get to that point? And there's two different roads you can go down.
Sure.
But I just want people to know initially that you can still, no matter what road, still work on those 6 places and jump up and down and breathe and do all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Does that make sense with my answer?
Yeah, definitely. Are you familiar with Patrick McKeown and his work with the oxygen advantage?
Yes. Yeah, he's been on my podcast.
Oh, I wondered whether he had been. Yeah, just going back to what you were talking about from breathing through the nose and the importance
That's where I got
in
it
it
from.
Yeah, okay.
That's been huge for me because, my lymphatic system was a hot mess. I mean, I had probably one of the worst lymphatic systems I've ever come across. And that's why I learned so much about it, because it was a system that was really making me sick and holding me back. And most of my life, I've been a breather through my mouth. And one, I look back on it, was probably because I really struggled breathing through my nose, because I was so congested with lymphatics, swelling and inflammation and mucus, that I couldn't breathe through my nose. I had to go through my mouth because this was always blocked. And when I was able to clear my lymph, and I could breathe through my nose, by the way, within 2 days, like I could not breathe before, and it'd probably been 30 years since I was able to do that. But my brain and my nervous system were so used to going through the mouth that it's still, to this day, I have to really focus on the nose because it automatically wants to go back to the mouth. But just changing that made a huge difference for me. And when you understand how lymph moves so much more at night, and breathing through the nose moves the diaphragm, which pumps the largest lymph node in your body that sits right underneath the diaphragm, the cisterna chyli. When I did what Patrick said, where I physically taped my mouth closed, so I can't breathe through my mouth, then that made me feel even better. But in my case, I had to clear the lymph first, right? Because if I taped my mouth shut, it wouldn't matter because I still couldn't breathe through my nose because my lymph was too congested. So that takes me back to my prior point, is that we move and we stimulate lymphatics first, and then we stack on the breathing. So you do both, but it's the order that you do it in that can sometimes make a huge difference for you. So it's very interesting because even with breathing, when people talk about breathing, they're talking about the diaphragm and they're talking about core stabilization and they're talking about stuff like this. Very few people will say you got to breathe through your diaphragm because it moves the lymph better. But we do, because that's one of the primary reasons why you breathe through your diaphragm, is to pump the lymph.
Okay. And signs and symptoms for our listeners of sort of mouth breathing is stuff like waking up with a dry mouth, yawning a lot, sighing. Are there any other kind of ones that you would pick up there?
Yeah, you get a lot of headaches, you get tired, you get fatigued, you get lethargy, brain fog, and then you get a lot of tingling and numbness in the hands and the feet. That's a big one. Cold hands
Okay.
and feet
Yeah.
when nobody can figure out why. Um, so if you think about it, a lot of those symptoms sound like lymph problems too, right?
Yeah.
And that's because you're also altering your ratio of carbon dioxide to oxygen in your body, and then it's going to go right back into the lymphatics anyway, because you know your ability to absorb the oxygen and to help CO2 leave the body. And same thing. What I want people to know is that you cannot physically talk about a system in your body that has an issue without linking lymphatics to it. It's impossible. Can't do it.
Okay. So just to clarify that, Perry, if someone's got cold hands and feet, because that is definitely one of the most common symptoms I see in clinic, and for like over a decade, like 95% of my clients always will tick that.
Yeah.
Are we saying that if someone has that, then we can be confident that the lymphatic system is also somewhat compromised just because of that issue with circulation?
Yeah, I'll step out and say that I believe that. Yes. So because that's going to be linked to breathing dysfunction a lot of times, right? But even if it's linked to anything else, from hormone issues to blood flow issues to liver issues, same thing.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'll always do an assessment on the lymphatics either way. And then it brings back a phrase that I say all the time. You got a lot of different systems in your body, you know, from lymphatic to digestive to nervous to all those, got it? But no system in your body ever works alone. It never gets injured alone, and it never heals alone from that way. So when you are doing an assessment of cold hands and feet, it never ever comes down to just one thing. It's not that easy, right? So it's all together. And in that case, for me, with cold hands and feet, even if you think from a circulatory standpoint, those are the most distal aspects in your body, right? So furthest away from what? The middle, right? What sits in the middle? Well, most of your blood and lymph flow sits in the middle. It's called your aorta. So if you're compromised with your blood flow there through the arteries or the veins or the lymph, it's going to be really hard for anything to reach the endpoints that way, right? And then those will be tied to pressure in your body. How you change pressure? Through your breathing, right? Big time. So everything is about the breathing. If you look at anything in relationship to people that are really enlightened and they know it, breathing is a big part of most chronic disease, chronic pain rehabilitation programs. But if I think about it honestly, it's not. Because in the small little bubble world that I'm in and you're in, everybody knows it. But when you go out into the real world outside the front door, very few people know it, about the power of the breathing. And even less people know about the lymphatics, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the work that you're doing with these types of shows and the education that you're putting out there, and I'm very thankful to be a part of it, are such a huge difference for someone. I look back for me, and I went through years of mental and physical anguish and emotional turmoil and points in my life when I didn't want to live anymore. And if I had just known, if somebody had just mentioned to me the lymph or the breath, at that time, it would have been transformational for me, right? And I don't want that to happen to any other human.
Brilliant. You know? Yeah. You know, it's one of those classic stories, I guess, of of you having gone through something, suffered, and come out the other side and now spreading that message?
Yeah, well, we very rarely change when we feel really comfortable. Why should you? Everything's going great. It's through suffering and trauma and pain. It's the classic stuff in literature. It's the hero's journey. Nobody wants to follow the life of somebody where everything is going good. It's like, what's coming at you? You're down for the count. Everybody's giving up on you. You're almost dead. And then you learn. Then you grow. Then you come across, for instance, that mentor, the guide, right? You have the hero and you have a guide. And then it's coming through to the end, through that suffering, right? And that's why I hated being sick, man. It was one of the hardest times in my life, but I'm actually very grateful and blessed that it did happen to me, because I never would have looked at things the way I look at it now. I never would have needed to look at the lymph, right? And refocus where I was and reframe where I was going. And when I started to talk with a lot of other people who've had many different types of illnesses of all types, from cancer to autoimmune to whatever, they all told me the same thing, that it was one of the greatest teachers they've ever had, greatest life lessons that they've ever had, even if it's just a reframe for them to remember just how grateful they are for the little things that they do have.
Yeah.
But it forces you to look at, that's how new discoveries are made too. And you're not afraid to challenge things either. Right. And I think that's a huge part of why I'm here today, because of that. And then I just knew, here's the thing, I get so excited when I teach lymphatics, even now, because I remember when I first came across the system, I was like, this is like wizard stuff. This is crazy amazing. I had no idea. And when I felt so much better from it, I said to myself, I can pretty much guarantee other humans would get excited about it too, once they see it and once they do it. And then that's why I decided to put the message out there and create the video and create the courses, because I honestly really wasn't seeing it anywhere. There's not a lot out there. There's more now. So I've been doing this for about 5 years. It's more recognized now than ever before, which is great, because people are starting to catch on and research is slowly beginning to catch up, which is good. But here's what I also found is that when it is delivered to you, they overcomplicate it, right? And it's really not a complicated system to work with. So I wanted to make it very simple, easy, and basic, and for any human to do. And you can do it in less than 60 seconds. So there's no excuse not to do it, right? And make it a little bit more fun, less overwhelming and intimidating, and feel like, oh man, if I push left and I should have pushed right, I'm going to fall apart. No, it's not that difficult. It's just do the 6 places, do it in the order that I showed you, jump up and down, do what I went over before. You're on to a good start.
Perfect. And just to clarify that, it's above the collarbone, below the collarbone, behind the sort of at the back of the jaw.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
then
we'll go through them again. Ready? If anybody's watching too. So you always want to go above and below the collarbone, both places, because that's a big drainage point and it's a big sticking point for movement. So above and below the collarbone, both sides. Then all the way at the top of the neck, on the sides of the neck. So run up the side of your neck, and then you're going to hit this big bone right there, right? And then you've got your ear, and you got that space where your jaw sits. So it's behind your jaw and right in front of that big bone. You rub there. That's the largest lymph node in your neck, okay? Then you go right at the shoulder where it attaches to the chest. Then you're going to go in your abdomen from the navel to the bottom of the sternum, just massage in that region there. Then to the groin, right? So right in the center of the groin, and then behind both knees at the crease of the knee, a little bit above and below. Just kind of hit the hole behind the knee. You can rub it, you can massage it, you can slap it, you can tap it, you can, do things to it. Just don't press so hard that you feel like you're hurting yourself. Then that means it's too hard. And you usually only have to do that once a day. You have to let the body, and I do recommend that people do that once a day. You can certainly do it more than once a day, but not in the beginning. You need to do it just once and see how you feel the next day, right? Because you may feel like the guy who you told me about who took my course, because you're moving toxins around and you got to let your body catch up a little bit.
Right.
Then you just do it again when you start to feel a little bit better, right? And it literally will take you 60 seconds when you get good at it.
Okay.
Powerful.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's probably a nice sort of summary, Perry, in regards to just re-clarifying that little manual exercise that people can do on themselves. But rather than say we're coming to an end today, I'm going to say we're going to hit pause. And perhaps we get you back on at a later date to kind of just go further into some of this stuff.
Yeah, you know me, man. I'll be available anytime because I'm always learning on my end. I'm forever a student, so I'm sure I'll have something new to discuss as well. It's always good.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for today. It's always a pleasure to hear you share your insight and experience, and I'm sure everyone's going to really enjoy and benefit from today's conversation.
I hope so. Thank you very much for having me and for everyone for listening. Meant a lot.